We have restored quite a few IBM PS2 desktops on this channel, and one tower. But what if you want to bring period correct hardware Monkey Island with you on a trip? Well, IBM got us covered. This is the IBM PS2 model P70. It's essentially a desktop model 70 in the shape of a briefcase. In this video we're going to repair and restore it. But before we do, I'd like to say thank you to one of my patrons, Paul, who donated this awesome little PS2. This machine is in a pretty rough shape, so this should be an interesting repair and restoration. The reason it has tape here is because the keyboard flips out like this. And I think these both locks here are broken, so we'll see if we can fix them. This must be the coolest IBM ever made. It's so different from other vintage PCs. It's such a strange machine. The hinges seems to be damaged on the display. It's supposed to flip out like this. And it actually does. But when pushed in, it doesn't lock into position. So I think something is wrong with the hinges. The diskette drive popped out. And it doesn't seem to lock in position either. Now check this out. Apparently this is a rental. Well, I guess that makes sense. These machines were insanely expensive back in the day. So I guess if you just wanted to play some Monkey Island, it kind of makes sense to just rent it. This thing is pretty heavy. And back here we have some more work. From what I can tell, this IBM has been dropped. Because this door back here is smashed. But we seem to have some parts here, so maybe we can repair it. So Paul bought this machine as a donor when he was restoring his P70. But he ended up not needing any parts. So with the exception of some broken parts, this machine seems to be complete. I think those 3 screws are enough to take this back piece off. Yep, here it comes. I think Paul mentioned that this SIM slot here was broken, but I can't see anything wrong with it. We'll check it and test it later. So these machines have a 386. I think this one runs at 20 MHz. The look and feel of this machine is typical IBM PS2. Really well engineered, and it looks very expensive. We're gonna go for a complete disassembly. This is a first for me, so we're gonna do some guesswork here. I think the first thing that needs to come out is this riser card here with the 2 MCA slots. On a project like this, I take lots of pictures in case something isn't clear when I do the reassembly. To get this whole assembly out, I think we need to remove this shield first. I think that means we also need to remove these standoffs for the VGA connector. Well, a lot of guesswork so far. Let's go for these standoffs too. And these are of course parallel and serial ports. We also have a PS2 for mouse. And I think this special connector here is for an external diskette drive. Okay, pretty good guessing so far. But we have one more screw here. Okay, so it seems the shield will come off together with this assembly. Yep, it certainly did. Okay, let's pull the graphics card next. It seems to be held down with 2 screws. We'll talk about the specs later. So first we need to disconnect the display here. But we can't pull the graphics card out. There is not room enough, so it has to come out together with the motherboard. Well, that means we need to remove the power supply first. But to get the power supply out, I think we need to remove the hard drive. Or at least the hard drive cable. So that's what we'll do. This hard drive is of course an IBM PS2 special. Let's pull these 2 cables off. That's a bit strange. The hard drive seems to have 2 of these connectors. So definitely an IBM PS2 special. Well, it's still stuck in something. So let's remove this screw here. Since we're going for a full disassembly, let's remove this one too. Let's try to pull down hard drive again. Yep, here it comes. and it's an IBM branded 120 meg drive, model WD3158. And we've got some leaky caps here, as expected. To remove the power supply, we need to cut some zip ties. This must be the cable for the diskette drive. Very nice and colorful. Well, it's hard to see what needs to be disconnected here, so let's try to pull that power supply. But I'll disconnect whatever cables I can reach. And a PS2 special here too. Okay, underneath the cable we have a screw. So that probably needs to be removed. And here's another one hidden away under some cables. This is not a quick and easy machine to disassemble, that is for sure. I think we need to remove these ground cables too. And probably this one too. The power cable to the display is connected underneath the motherboard. So we can't disconnect it quite yet. But we do need to remove this cable here. So this must be for the keyboard. IBM have used tons of different screws for this machine. And this is how I keep track of them. I put them on the paper and then I just write down what they are for. Okay, let's try to pull that power supply again. It's almost free. I think it's stuck in this screw here. The screw has come undone, but it's not coming out. Let's see if we can pull that screw out. Well, it's not coming out easily. Finally. That took some fiddling. Okay, let's try again. No, it's still stuck in something. So my best guess is that it's stuck in the power switch, which is located inside the machine here. There's a tab on the keyboard here that will turn the machine off when the lid is closed. So don't forget to save your game before you pull the keyboard up. The keyboard is, by the way, removable. And it also has this nifty stand here. So I guess this is a good time to disconnect the keyboard. Okay, let's see if the power supply is unstuck now. Yes, it is. And here's our power supply. As I mentioned, we can't quite disconnect it yet, because the connector is underneath the graphics card. Before we can remove the motherboard, we need to disconnect what I think is the LED panel on the front down here, the CMOS battery and the speaker. And now we can remove all the screws for the motherboard. Okay, I think that was the last one. Now let's see if we can remove the motherboard together with the graphics card. Yep, here it comes. I'm going to remove the graphics card so I don't stress the connector when I wash these boards. So how's that for a weird graphics card? Next we have a small PCB down here. I think it's the LED panel. Yep, sure enough. Up in the corner here we have the CMOS battery and the speaker. It needs to come out. Now that is one tiny speaker. I guess it's enough to make some annoying beeps. And then we have this plastic shield here that has been taped down. Same thing with this large ribbon cable here. I'll try to reuse that copper tape. The last thing to come out on this side of the machine is this plastic cover that seems to be holding the keyboard cable in place. IBM is pretty much empty on this side now. So let's flip it around to access the display and the diskette drive. There were no screws at the back to hold the display in, so they must be on this side of the machine. Yeah, for sure, we do have some screws underneath the display here, but I can only access 2 screws here, so I'm not sure how this will come out. Well, it's not as difficult to disassemble as some vintage laptops, but definitely not easy. Well, it's not obvious how to remove this display, but I think it needs to be pushed upwards and then out. Yep, that seems to be correct. So now the display is only held in place with the cable, but I still can't see the connectors. So they must be hidden away underneath this shield here. Let's remove it and find out. So this is the piece de resistance of this machine. This crazy orange display. The power cable has a zip tie. So we need to remove it and remember to replace it. This connector here looks a bit odd. Let's see if we can remove this display without disconnecting this cable. There's also a large ground cable on this side here. This is a bit tricky to get on camera, but the cable seems to be clamped. So let's flip the machine over again. And here's the clamp for the main cable to the display. But unfortunately it's too thick, so we can't feed it through the hole here. Well, that's odd. Same thing with the power cable. It's too thick to come out through this hole here. So there's no way to remove it from the machine. Well, unless there's a hidden connector inside this heat shrink. Let's find out. Yes, it is. So here's the connector. Okay, so the power supply is free now. And I think we can feed the power cable through this hole here and out through the front. Yep. But we still need to disconnect this cable here. So I'm just going to be careful and pull that connector off. Okay, it's just a regular connector, similar to a diskette drive or a hard drive, only smaller. The cable, however, is still too thick to go through that small hole. So we need to remove the ferrite core. And it comes off like this. Oh, it has been glued on too. Crap, but maybe it's thin enough to go through now. Let's find out. Yep, that totally worked. Might as well remove the carrying handle next. I just realized this is not one piece. There is a thin gap here. So the case actually consists of two pieces. And here comes the carrying handle. Okay, the carrying handle is also held down with two pins. Unfortunately, they seem to need quite a lot of force to come out. Okay, I managed to get one of those pins out. Let's see if I can get this one on camera. So I used a large rivet. Then I squeezed that pin out like this. Here they are. The reason why I wanted to get this carrying handle off is that I have seen that these are often discolored. So I want to know if that rubber is replaceable. I think it is. Yep. This can be taken apart. But that has a really odd shape. So I don't fancy finding something similar to replace it with. That's too bad. But at least I can clean it. Perhaps some peroxide will help to get it back to its original color. Okay, the last part to come out is the diskette drive. Let's see if we can remove that cover. This drive doesn't work, needs a repair. On these machines they all do. Okay, here's the cover. And we have a date, 21st of October 1989. Well, I can only see one screw down here. So let's remove it and see if the drive will come off. And it did. And more cables to feed through small holes. So this case here is made out of two parts. You can also see the gap here. However, these two parts seems to be glued together. So if you ever break one of these tabs or these, you're in for a really tough repair. You could probably heat the case enough for that glue to loosen up, but it's definitely not an easy task. I almost forgot this thingy here. Let's remove it, because we need to check it. This plastic part is made to lock the diskette drive, so it stays closed when closed. I don't know what these are called. I've seen this type of lock many times. And it doesn't seem to be broken. And here's the corresponding tab. So something else must have been preventing the diskette drive to stay closed. We'll try to figure it out. Okay, I had a closer look at the motherboard, or planar as IBM likes to call them. This SIM slot here is perfectly okay, and apparently this is the broken SIM slot. So we're gonna need to do some repairs on this machine. This is unfortunately not an uncommon fault with the P70 and some other vintage machines. So here's a good slot. And as you can see, this piece here has been broken off. Okay, let's see if we can fix this. I covered all the white plastics on the board to prevent them from getting discolored from heat. The power cable is soldered to the board, unfortunately. So I'm gonna have to tape it down too. Well, that was easier said than done. That cable was really stiff. But with enough tape here, I think we're okay. So this may not be necessary, but I found that some white plastics go yellow from enough heat. So better safe than sorry. Well, I ran into a small problem here. This motherboard here is way too tall to fit in my PCB holder. So I had to mount it in this direction here to prevent it from hanging loosely here and get all bent from heat. I put this thing here under. It's plastic, so I hope it doesn't melt. Both thermocouplers are attached to the board, one on each side. Okay, let's turn the heat on. I'm gonna go with 130 degrees Celsius. So in a moment here we are going to have roughly 130 degrees Celsius underneath the board and about 100 degrees on top of the board. By the way, if you're only repairing boards like this occasionally, check out the video I made last week repairing the BP6 board. In that video I showed you how you can use a cheap heat gun to preheat a motherboard instead of a fancy preheater like this. Well, perhaps I shouldn't call it fancy, it was really cheap. But hey, it does the job, so I'm happy. Okay, I skipped ahead here and we have reached the temperature. Unfortunately, the smallest nozzle for my desoldering gun is completely worn out. I have ordered some new nozzles. But for now I only have this way too large nozzle to use. But it will just have to do. Well, too large nozzle or not, this seems to be working. Well, this is going pretty well. So I'll skip ahead here until I have desoldered all these pins for the SIM slot. Well, I got the solder out from most of the pads, but a few stubborn ones still have some solder left. So I'll add some fresh solder and have a second go. Roughly 7 through holes out of the 72 needed some fresh solder and a second go. So that's not too bad. Okay, while I was checking if all the pins were loose, the slot just fell out, so it definitely was. I cranked the temperature down to 50 degrees and I let it cool down slowly. Okay, the board has cooled down and all the pads look fine. So we're all good with the motherboard. However, I ran into another problem. Pretty big problem actually. We can't use the SIM slot I intended for this board because the RAM is installed from this side in the original slots. However, with the slot I got, the RAM is installed from this side. Now, this may not seem like a big problem, but unfortunately it is. Because if we install the RAM in this slot here, we can't install the RAM in the new slots. And obviously the other way around too. So if we install this RAM here, we won't be able to install this stick here. So this kind of sucks. I thought these guys were standardized, so I didn't even bother to check. So unfortunately, this means we're gonna have to do without for today. But I will of course source a correct SIM slot and install it here. Well, that was a bit annoying, but let's move on and take care of that hard drive. It's really a bummer that IBM made so many specials when it comes to the hard drives. I've been trying to source a working hard drive for my Model 50 for years, and it's pretty much impossible because they only made one special drive that will fit in that machine. Now let's remove this large cradle here and then remove the shield underneath the PCB. I have to say, this machine is pretty clean for its age. Most of my vintage IBMs came with a lot more dust inside. So these guys here are tiny little T8s. Let's get them off the board. Check the condition underneath. So we probably have a fragile flat flex here somewhere. So I'm gonna be really careful here. Yes, we have 2 flat flex cables. We've got one on the side here and another one at the back here, with both connectors loose. Well, we actually have a loose piece here. Now, where did this thing come from? Actually, I'm not sure it belongs in here. Okay, so we only have these caps here. So very similar to other drives we have repaired in other videos. Well, we don't have any plastic parts to worry about. So we can just use the rework station. Pretty crusty pads, but I think we caught this one on time. This still looks fixable. You can see some corrosion on the leg of this chip here. So we'll clean it up. When I remove caps like this, I make sure never to lift them up. Instead I pull them sideways. That way we don't risk damaging the pads, in case the cap gets stuck to the pad. Let's add some flux. I'll add some flux to this leg here too. And now we can let the flux do its magic. With some help of fresh solder. The leg of one of the caps actually stayed on the board. It was so badly corroded. Let's use some wick to remove the solder. Yeah, pretty crusty. But it could have been worse. A lot worse. So if you have a P70, you may want to remove the caps on the hard drive. If you don't use the hard drive, you don't need to replace them. Just get them off the board before they destroy the PCB. Well, it doesn't look too bad, but let's have a second go with flux and see if we can clean that corrosion off this chip pin here. It's just a regular 74 F245. So easy to replace if it's dead, but let's hope it's okay. Yes, I think these pads are completely undamaged. Only the old solder was corroded. Yeah, these pads look really good. Awesome, so we definitely caught this one on time. I removed the flux while it's still warm by twisting it off with a dry Q-tip. So I'm basically scooping it up. I find this to be the quickest way. And when most of the flux is gone, I use some IPA. Pretty much just to remove the stickiness. Yeah, I think this chip leg is okay too. Okay, we're in luck. I checked my stash and we have caps. So the original cap here was 100 micro 6 volts. And this guy here is 100 micro 10 volts. So that should be just fine. I'll add some solder to one of the pads. Polarity is clearly marked on the board. And these new caps are about the same size as the original caps. And then we can just solder the other side of the cap. Well, this is a bit tight, so I may have to switch to a smaller tip. These two guys here are 47 micro 16 volts. Now these are quite a bit smaller than the original caps. So we've got plenty of room between the caps to solder. So no need to swap to a smaller tip. Okay, we're all good. Let's hope this drive works. Okay, next up we have the diskette drive. So Paul told me that the leaky caps had damaged the PCB in this drive here. So he has done a partial repair, but unfortunately it's still not working. So first we need to remove the drive from the drive cage. Now let's get inside the drive and see how bad this is. Okay, so I recognize this drive. I think we have repaired one of these in a previous video. So first we need to disconnect the flat flex for the heads. And then we have a cable here for the zero check sensor. And lastly we have a cable for the stepper here. Now let's remove this PCB here. If I remember correctly, we have a few caps underneath this PCB too. Let's flip it over. Yeah, we sure do. This doesn't look like a repair. This actually looks like a factory mod. And these are not SMD caps. So I actually don't think this is a repair. This is probably IBM's doing, or perhaps I should say Alp's doing, because they made the drive. Okay, well in that case, our issue is probably on this board here. Yeah, this looks like a repair for sure. Yeah, I can see some corrosion on some of the pads here. But these guys here look like they are the original caps. Let me check those up close. Okay, we're in luck. I found an identical drive in my stash. This drive is lined up for a recap too. But this could come in handy, because now we can check the traces and see if we still have a break on this PCB. And both drives have the same bodge on this PCB. So that means this is a factory bodge. Okay, I noticed here that these three caps here, they are identical to these caps here. So either Paul has replaced them with identical caps, or these are still the original caps. So I think that's where we'll start. We'll replace these guys here. These are bipolar 4.7 micro 16 volt caps. Oh crap, I managed to blow a resistor off the board. That's embarrassing, but that's an easy fix. We'll put it back on. But let's remove this guy here first. This time I'll try not to blow any resistors off the board. There we go. Let's start by removing the old solder. And I have switched to a smaller tip for this. Now let's clean this up before we reinstall components. Okay, we've got plenty of these too. And the polarity of course doesn't matter, since these are bipolar. Now let's put R9 back on the board. There isn't much room between the components on this PCB. So I think we might have a bridge here. Let's add some flux. Reflow. Yep, that fixed it. I ran out of 0.38 solder, so I'm using 0.5. This stuff feels way too thick for small components like this. One wouldn't think that 0.12 millimeters makes a difference, but it really does. 0.38 solder is perfect in my opinion. Definitely my favorite thickness of solder. Okay, so then we have this area here. It's a neat repair, so it's a bit of a shame to remove it. But since we have an identical board for comparison, I think we need to check all the traces in this area and see if we have any additional damage to the board here. Okay, so the nasty electrolyte went this way here and damaged these traces here. And then it also went this way here and damaged a bunch of traces. And this pad is missing entirely. So before we start cleaning with flux, I'm going to grind some of that corrosion off. That is going to make the cleaning much easier. Not sure I'm going to do all of this on camera because it's so hard to see with the camera on top of the PCB. I'm going to clean off all the black areas on all these traces, because some of that electrolyte is underneath the solder mask and may continue to damage the PCB. Well, I think you get the idea here. So I'll do the rest of the cleaning off camera. That way I can actually see something. Okay, said and done. Now let's add some flux, especially to these chip legs here. I'm also going to tin the exposed traces. I'll add some fresh solder to the tip. And then I'll tin the bare traces. And hopefully the flux will clean up this chip here. I hope this chip is still good, because those pins don't look too good. The electrolyte inside those caps is very corrosive and can cause a lot of damage. I'll reapply Flux a few times and see if these legs will clean up. This is really tight, so I'll do some more cleaning off camera. Okay, that actually went pretty well. So these crusty black legs are now nice and shiny again. And hopefully they won't continue to corrode. Now let's see if we have any more broken traces. So these two guys are going underneath here, so I can't see where they are going. But this pin here is going in this direction and it's connected to this cap here. And this pad here, then it continues this way and coming up here and going back to the chip actually, and connects to this pin here back at the chip. Well, in that case we can skip this leg. Let's check this guy here. It's going in this direction and connects to this pad here. I also have a trace coming out from underneath the chip and connects to the other side of this cap here. Okay, I had to clean off some more solder mask here. So that trace is connected to this cap here, and then it continues to the missing pad here. After the pad, it also continues to this side here and connects to this component here. So that's why I added that thin red wire. Okay, so that means we don't have any additional broken traces here, except for the missing pad here and this break. This area should be okay, and hopefully that corroded chip is still good. Well, we haven't played with copper tape in a while, so I'll cut a piece to size and we'll use it to fix this missing pad. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. This stuff here is just really thin copper with a self-adhesive back. Now we can add some flux and with some fresh solder on the tip. We can solder it to this pad here and to the broken trace at this end here. Now let's clean it and check if it makes contact at both ends. This stuff is kind of fun to play around with. It makes for almost invisible repairs. Well, not quite, because we're missing the solder mask on top of the copper, of course. So we have basically added a new trace to this PCB. And it makes contacts on this side of this cap. And it's not shorted to the other side. And it also makes contacts to the trace that's going to this component here. And you could make it even more neat by making it even thinner. The reason I made it so thick is because we're also going to use that trace as a pad. Let's add some solder to the pad that isn't broken and solder the cap on this side. Now let's make sure that it actually works too. Yeah, definitely still making contact to the cap. Then it continues on the other side. Let's make sure it's not shorted underneath. And it's not. I'll check with the nearby traces too, just to make sure we don't have any shorts. No, we're okay. The other cap here is a 10 microfarad 16 volt cap. These two caps, by the way, are not bipolar. But polarity is clearly marked on the board. Okay, I actually got a short here, but luckily I checked and noticed. It's very easy to do when the traces are so close to each other and exposed. There's probably 0.5 millimeter between this pad here and this exposed trace here. So I'll resolder that cap and be a bit more careful. Okay, I cleaned this area and checked everything with the beeper. And I think we're all good. But as we have seen, this area was already fixed. So this shouldn't make any difference. But hopefully these guys here made a difference. Next up we have the power supply. We need to get inside and check for nasty little refills. Oddly enough, the fan is installed with security screws. And these are T10. There is almost no dust inside the fan. So maybe Paul cleaned it. And the rest, unfortunately, is rivets. So we're gonna need to drill those out and replace them later. Okay, rivets are drilled and removed. Now let's have a look inside. And the usual disclaimer. Please don't mess around inside power supplies. There may be caps inside charged with mains voltage. Not the easiest power supply to get inside for sure. The cover seems to be stuck in something. Oh, I see, it has been taped at the back here. So we need to pull this tape off. It still seems to be stuck in this corner here. So maybe we need to remove this bezel here first. Presumably held down with some tabs. Yes, it was. And the tabs didn't break. That's awesome. Now we can remove the lid. And so I thought. There is another cover inside. Definitely not a quick and easy power supply to take apart. In that case, let's remove all the screws underneath the power supply. And apparently they are not all identical. So I need to keep track of these. I'm gonna have to take a picture to know which screw goes where. Probably need to remove this ground cable here too. And annoyingly, it's a different type of security screw. This was clearly not designed to be serviced. Okay, that took the shield off. But we're still not inside. I skipped ahead here a bit, but now we're finally inside. Wow, that took some fiddling to check this power supply. Okay, good news. There are no refas inside here. These guys are some other brand. I checked all the electrolytics and none of them seems to be leaking or bulging. And it's surprisingly clean inside here too. No need to wash this board. I'm just going to blow out the little dust there is inside here. And this power supply is ready to test too. An important thing when drilling out rivets on a power supply is that these bits here are left inside and could cause a short, of course. So count your rivets before you reassemble your power supply. Well, that was a pain, but now we know it's okay inside and safe to turn on. I'm going to leave the rivets out until we have made the tests. One of the rivets is also holding down this bracket here, so I need to remember to put it back on before I install the rivet here. Okay, I think we're ready for the first tests. Let's start with the bare minimum. So that means the graphics card, and the display, and the power supply, of course, for the motherboard and the display. I'll connect the LED panel too, so we can see what's going on. And the machine is turned on. Okay, I think we're ready. Fingers crossed. Okay, the fan and the power supply is spun up. I think the green LED is lit up too. And the screen flashed red. And it's counting up the RAM. So machine is posting. Okay, that display was a bit tricky to get on camera. So I had to turn the lights off. And unfortunately it doesn't sync with my camera. So we're gonna have to deal with some flickering. But that is the camera's doing. So the image is perfectly stable here. And it's nice and bright. And it went into IBM Basic. Well, in that case, let's connect the diskette drive. This drive is getting its power through the ribbon cable. Let's start with the cleaning disk. I'll turn the machine on and we'll see how it behaves. Okay, head is moving. And unfortunately, this drive is jammed. So it needs some lubrication. I guess we should connect the keyboard too. I don't know if this machine needs a battery to post. So let's connect the battery. We might as well connect the speaker too. Well, the heads are moving, but unfortunately that drive isn't spinning. Let's do a test with a regular diskette. No, unfortunately that drive is not spinning. Well, I'm gonna have to check, but I think this chip here is controlling the motor. So I wonder if that electrolyte killed that chip. That's pretty bad, unless I can find a spare chip. In any case, this drive needs more repair. To test the hard drive, we need to run the reference disk in the diskette drive. And to do so, we obviously need a working diskette drive. So we can't test the hard drive at the moment. The keyboard seems to be working, but to make a more thorough test, we also need to run the reference disk. The hinges on the display actually aren't broken. I did some reading online, and that seems to be a pretty rare thing. The reason why the display doesn't lock in its closed position is because this latch here is broken off. This is supposed to be an L-shaped piece of plastic, and it's supposed to lock into this latch here. Luckily these are available to buy, so I'll order one of these. And then we have the issue with the missing SIM slot, of course. I did a quick Google, but these are a bit hard to find, because most listings don't have good enough pictures so you can see where the notch is for pin 1. So I'm gonna give myself a week to find the correct SIM slot. If I can't find it, we're gonna do a mod and make this work anyways. So for instance, we could move the SIM slot to this position here, and then use the SIM slot I have in this position, because this RAM stick could be installed from either side. Well, this is a pretty big project. I'll order a few things and continue recording in a couple of days. If you're watching this 2 weeks from now, there will be a link on the screen shortly to the remaining repair and reassembly. If you're watching this fresh, hit the bell icon below and set it to all. Meanwhile, check out this restoration video about the weird and wonderful IBM PS1 286. I will end by saying thank you to my patrons, with a special thanks to Paul for donating this awesome IBM. I appreciate your support. If you want to support me too, consider becoming a patron. Patrons get ad-free early access. If you like this video, let me know with a thumbs up in the comments. If you're a regular viewer, consider subscribing to this channel. Thank you for watching, I'll see you next week.